three main reasons why there might be a decline year over year in applicants to PT and OT, with OT being impacted greater. So reason number one, hey everybody, welcome to the Better Outcome Show. I'm your host, Rafi Salazar. And this week we're diving into the allied health science world, particularly the coming shortfall of clinicians. It's been predicted for a very, very long time, right? The population is getting older, which means they're going to need more, for example, physical therapy, occupational therapy. Yet those specific industries or professions are seeing and have been seeing a decline in applications to their programs over subsequent years. I mean, this is one of those things back when I was a professor, years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were seeing a steep decline in applications. And this kind of came to the forefront for me. I was kind of scrolling through LinkedIn the other day, and Sarah Lyons, I'm going to maybe link to her original post, but she threw up this graphic that I'll share here. And basically, let me just get it up and we can talk about it. So if you're not watching on the YouTube, you can go to YouTube and find this, find the image here that I'm going to share. But it's basically just a graph over time from 2016 to 2023. So it's not doesn't have the last 2 years, but from 2016 to 2023, it's a line graph here. You see PT's in yellow, OT is in red, and the decline over the years, net decline since 2016. For PT, it's 17%, so it's down 17% in the number of applicants to programs year over year. And then OT is much, much steeper of a fall at about 45%. So Sarah in her post was basically, asking, what do you think is the reason? Like, maybe people are pitching the professions wrong. Maybe that could be it. Maybe prospective applicants or students that might be interested in physical or occupational therapy aren't getting a good, clear picture of what physical and occupational therapy is as a career field, what your day-to-day looks like, what the career trajectory looks like. Maybe that's why they're just not applying, is because they're just not getting a good idea or a good sense of the profession. And then she asks she says at the very end, she said she still feels hopeful about OT in particular. She sees what's on the horizon. To her, applying now when competition is low can be like buying low in the stock market, and it's only up from here. So that was her original post. And I responded with kind of some of the reasons why I believe we've seen this steep decline across both physical and occupational therapy, primarily with occupational therapy being affected the most. So I'm going to outline each of them, and then we'll kind of dive in one at a time. So what I basically said in my response was, there are three probably main reasons. There's more than that, I'm sure. Three main reasons why there might be a decline year over year in applicants to PT and OT, with OT being impacted greater. So reason number one, and this is going to be one that impacts OT the most, because we've been going through this as a profession. Back when I was a professor in 2015, they were talking about on the horizon making entry level be a doctorate for the profession instead of the master's, which it is now. And then over the years, there was this push by ACOT, which is the accrediting body for occupational therapy, to move into doctoral entry level programs, and new standards came out. I remember being on faculty, and there was a lot of uncertainty about, okay, which faculties need to, or which programs need to transition, and when do we need to transition, and what does faculty makeup look like after the transition, all that kind of stuff. So point number one, and why occupational therapy is probably seeing a bigger drop than physical therapy, is going to be really just the confusion about entry-level requirements, specifically on the OT side, right? Like, is it going to be a doctorate? Is it going to be a master's? If I go now and apply to a master's program, graduate in 2 years, and by the time I'm done, it's now an entry-level doctorate. Does that impact my job, my job prospects going forward? There are a lot of unknowns there for applicants. And I sit on the board for NBCOT, for the national certification body for occupational therapy here in the United States. And I remember being in a few meetings, and there were people, we had gotten input from folks from the nursing profession, because nursing has multiple levels to enter the profession, right? You can go LPN, you can go BSN, so a bachelor's degree. There's master's programs. Obviously, you can go, for higher. You can go get a nurse practitionership and get doctoral degrees down the line. But there's multiple entry points into the profession, and the feedback we got was that this is going to be detrimental in the short term for applicants or prospective applicants coming into the field. Because if you think about why people go into healthcare, I've said this a lot. I know we talked about this on several previous episodes. One of them was the recruiting episode. I can't remember. I think his name was Mike, maybe Mike Neal. I'm going to link to that episode, but it was on, he owns a company called Build My Team, and they basically recruit for healthcare professions. And he basically said people go into healthcare for one of two reasons. They either go into it, number one, because they've fallen in love with the profession. They believe there's a vocational or a calling aspect to it. They feel in some sense, quote unquote, called to care, right? Like Larry Ben's book. They feel like this is a higher purpose of their life. It's a way that they're able to give back to society, and kind of fulfill their purpose on earth, right? They feel called to healthcare. It's very vocational. The other side of the bucket, and a lot of times there's some overlap here, but the other reason that people go into healthcare is because we're told from the time we're young, healthcare is a safe, stable, secure career field, right? There's always going to be sick people. I remember being told that multiple times going through undergrad and through graduate school. There's always going to be a need. You're always going to be needed because the skill sets that you have are going to apply for this aging population that we have. So at least for the next 30 or 40 years, there's only going to be an increased demand in what we do. So when you look at that demographic, or maybe the psychometric profile of those folks, people that are primarily going into healthcare because of the safe, stable, secure job aspect, or that part is attracted to them, you get a group of people who are very risk averse, right? And in a profession where you've got uncertainty about entry level into the profession and what that means for job prospects down the line, that's going to be too much of a risk for people that are naturally, have lower risk tolerance, right? So it's going to drive some of those applicants out of prospective applicants from applying, because they'll look at the other options that are in the healthcare sphere and say, you know what, I'll just apply to one of these. They seem to have their stuff in order. Maybe physical therapy is an example. They've been a doctor, entry-level doctor for years. They're not going to go back down. They can't go anywhere forward, so we're just going to go there, right? So, and I remember, again, being in some of these meetings with some of the input from the nursing profession, and that was basically what they said. Like, you're creating a lot of uncertainty. That's going to cause a decline in applicants into OT programs. Now, they did say there might be a bounce back because, again, there is going to be a need for occupational therapy, and we do provide valuable services. But at least in the short term, 5, 7, 10 years while you're figuring this mess out, it's going to drive some candidates who are more risk averse away. And that's just the nature of applying uncertainty or adding uncertainty to what is arguably one of the largest investments, most impactful investments that a student or an investor is going to make, right? Where they get their degree, the type of degree that they invest their dollars in is going to be, and at this point now, I mean, basically a mortgage by the time they graduate, $100,000 worth of tuition when it's all said and done. And are you really going to risk taking that or making that investment if you don't know what the outcome is going to be, whether or not it's going to be positive, or whether there's going to be uncertainty about whether you need a new job or you need to go back to school to get another degree or a post-professional doctorate and all this kind of stuff. So the confusion element about entry level for OT definitely has impacted, in my opinion, that steep drop off for occupational therapy. On the PT side, it's probably an ROI factor, right? You're going to spend $100 or plus $1,000 in tuition. You're going to spend 4 years of undergrad and then 3 years in graduate school getting your doctorate. That's 7 years and $100,000. And for a potentially a capped earning potential, that's not entirely enticing to folks these days, right? The other two reasons would be pressures from vertical integration or PE-backed healthcare and big corporate healthcare, and then number three would be like the career trajectory for allied health science folks, physical and occupational therapists in particular. So let's dive into the piece of, we'll call it vertical integration or corporate pressures. So physical and occupational therapy has been getting gobbled up. I know I've mentioned this on Strata's podcast when I was over there. I know that Paul Singh has mentioned it when he's come on our podcast. I've seen it a lot over the last several years. I remember when I bought the practice that I run now, back in 2020, I had a buddy of mine who was doing M&A or mergers and acquisitions on behalf of some of these private equity firms. And he kept telling me, man, there's just a lot of opportunity here to roll up physical and occupational therapy practices because there's a lot of value to be made and created there by centralizing systems, by growing and scaling and all of that. And there's a need and a demand. So they were very bullish back then, and they still are, on piling into some of these ancillary healthcare professions. And you've even seen it now with healthcare systems, health systems, hospitals buying almost, they've kind of grown their hospital as big as they can now, and now they're just buying other entities as a way to add revenue to their organization and kind of keep the patients in-house, right? To kind of drive revenue up. So there is this push, and has been this push for several years, for private equity, for corporations to come in and kind of make healthcare more consolidated. And what that does from a standpoint of how does it impact physical and occupational therapists? Well, a lot of us in the outpatient world in particular, or even it's happening here in the home health space as well, become viewed, those two disciplines become viewed more as line items to be managed, right? It's an area to quote unquote operationalize or create efficiencies in to drive the bottom line, which means that what you end up having is a lot of pressure from the corporate entity that buys these PT and OT practices to see more patients, to be more quote unquote efficient, to maximize billing for FTEs, utilization, all of that kind of stuff. And then I've mentioned this before on the book, is that on the counter side, on the payer side, they're looking at it as a line item expense to be managed as well, which means that you've got this tension now where these organizations are coming in and buying a lot of physical and occupational therapy practices and trying to drive up their operational efficiency, which basically means bill more for less work. And then on the payer side, they're trying to manage this. So the only option that they have, I've said this before several times, the only levers that payers have to manage these fee-for-service providers is to either one, deny or regulate or restrict the amount of those services they're willing to pay for, and we're seeing it with like authorizations, hard caps, the requirements to get an authorization, to continue authorization, you're going to be given so many visits, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other lever that they have is to pay less for those services, right? So those are the only two things the main two things that payers can do to manage this increase in the operational efficiency of these fee-for-service providers, is to simply say, okay, we're either not going to pay you as much, or we're going to pay you for a lower quantity of that service. So there's this cat and mouse game, which basically is just causing downward pricing pressure onto physical and occupational therapists, which comes out in the wash on the corporate side, because now maybe they're doubling up on patients or tripling up on patients or trying to do more with less. They're not hiring as many support staff because the margin isn't there anymore. And what you end up having are physical and occupational therapists that are boots on the ground in the clinics, just getting ground in the mill, and they're getting burnt out, essentially. There's a burnout cycle, right? So productivity demands, reduced autonomy is leading to this clinician fatigue and attrition already. So you have clinicians that are leaving the field, and that does two things, right? It means, one, there are less providers in the market right now to serve people that are in need, which means there's less, clinical education sites. There's less advocates for the profession in the marketplace as it stands, right? And it also means that those people that burn out and leave are actively dissuading people from entering the field. It doesn't take too long to search Reddit or Facebook or some of these social media sites and see some post somewhere about a physical or occupational therapist that's been in an outpatient corporate clinic setting and just is burnt out, and now they've left and they're doing customer success at a health tech startup or something like that because they just needed to get out, or utilization review or case management. They just want out of the profession. They don't want to treat patients anymore. Not because they don't like treating patients, they don't love their job, but they hate the way that it's being done, right? They're feeling like a number on a spreadsheet that's trying to be optimized, right? That needs to be optimized. And that leads to a bunch of word of mouth deterrent, right? Burnt out clinicians discouraging their friends, their family, people that might reach out to them from entering the profession, means that those prospective students who might have felt drawn to PT or OT are now not applying anymore because their friend, their neighbor, their cousin, whatever, told them not to do it because it's terrible. It's a quote unquote terrible job, right? The third reason for this, tank, if you would, of applications to the physical and occupational therapy in particular, might be that some of the career trajectory for rehab professionals is kind of unclear, right? You can become maybe a director of rehab, you can become a rehab manager, maybe you can become a rehab liaison or something like that. But especially within the field of, like, if you're going to stay within your discipline or whatever, the ceiling is fairly low for an occupational or physical therapist, right? And if you look at other clinical degrees like nursing, for example, like I think most like head of quality or quality assurance or quality compliance or improvement at hospital systems, those job descriptions require an RN degree, right? Maybe it's because there are just many more nurses and they've done a good job as a profession of preparing their people for management and executive roles. And the other thing might just be that PTs and OTs just haven't done that part on the education side or on the advocacy part. But it's unclear for new grads entering PT and OT, what do we do if we want to advance our career? Is there going to be an opportunity for me to be a chief operational officer, for example, or something like that? Or is there an opportunity for me to step into some kind of upper management position? And that it's unclear, and it's rather difficult, right? So that in and of itself is kind of dissuading folks when they're looking at the nursing or at the allied health profession. They want to go into healthcare. They know they don't want to go into med school or to PA school or something like that. They want to do something in the allied health. Should it be PT or OT? Well, if I do that, I'm going to end up working in an outpatient clinic where I'm getting ground in the mill, trying to see high volume care. But if I go into nursing, I'll do that for a year. I'll work on a floor for a couple of years, and then I can kind of move up into management, into lower management, then middle management, then upper management, kind of ride or climb the ladder, if you will. So for people who are looking at healthcare as a safe, stable, secure job that has a career expansion as part of it, that bucket of people are looking at PT and OT, and they just don't see an ROI there, right? I had written an article several years ago. I mean, this is like one of the first articles I wrote on LinkedIn, probably 2016, 2015, maybe before that, maybe back before I was a professor. And it was basically on the student loan crisis. Back then it was called a student loan crisis. And basically the argument that I made in that article, which I still tell clinicians or potential students that are coming in that are just kind of shadowing, or students that are asking me for advice, the argument that I made is you really need to look at your investment into your education and the ROI that it's going to provide immediately on year 1, year 3, year 5, whatever. And at the time, this was back then, I had graduated back in 2012 with maybe $40,000 or $50,000 in student debt. And my wife graduated as a teacher with maybe 20,000 or so. We had like 60,000 bucks between us, 60 or 70 between us. And we both graduated into fields that had high demand at the time, and there's still demand for teachers and for clinicians, right? So we graduated into fields that had high demand at salaries that were our first year salary combined was more than our total student debt. Like I said, I don't know how possible that is now, given just the inflation in the tuition over the last 10 years or so. But that's what I encourage people to do: is look at the field you're considering, look at the demand for that, the demand projections for that job, what the salary is going to be, and then you want to tailor it so that you can end up paying for your student loans or paying off your education in the first 5 years of being a professional. Now that requires some prioritization and some sacrifice for sure. But in my case, we graduated again with $60,000 or $70,000 in student loans. I think my first job out of school was in the $68,000 a year range. My wife was making 30 or so as a teacher, and we paid off our loans in 3 years. Now, it meant that we were living off a teacher salary for 3 years. We made some sacrifices, but we had the ability to do that because when we went into our professions, when we were picking our degrees, I looked at it. I looked at, what is it going to cost me to get this degree in occupational therapy? What's my first year salary going to be? What's the timeline for, or the trajectory of my career going to look like? Is that investment worth it, given the timeline that I'm willing to dedicate to it, right? And if the answer was no, then I would have picked something else, right? Or I would have gone into something else. Now, I was drawn to occupational therapy for personal reasons, like I've shared before. I was a patient in an outpatient hand clinic when I had a flexor pollicis injury or laceration right before my senior year in high school. So I feel like, I was going into healthcare. Occupational therapy is what I wanted to do, but I still looked at it very much dollars and cents. This is how much I'm going to put into it. This is how much it's going to cost me in the long run. Is it worth it? Is it doable? Am I willing to commit to what is necessary to kind of paying off that debt load when I graduate? And is it possible, right? Like if you're graduating and you have, $170,000 worth of student debt, for example, and you're going to make $70,000 or $80,000 a year as a new grad, that becomes very difficult to do, right? So anyways, that's this part 3 there. Number 3 is like this whole idea of compensation, career trajectory, being able to map that out. I think in school, when I was a professor, I tried, because I was all over the place. I did some clinic leadership. I did some clinical education coordination. I was a professor. I was a management consultant, practice owner, all of that kind of stuff. I tried to expand my students' minds into like, these are the possibilities that you can branch into with your degree. It just takes intentional, and maybe this will be another podcast episode down the line, but if your aspirations are to really grow your income within a corporate healthcare setting, you can't just rely on your clinical degree, right? It's going to take some training, some intentional seeking out of opportunities to kind of branch and grow into some of those upper management C-suite roles. And we don't do a good job in the PT and OT space of sharing that information with our students when they're coming through our programs. It's one of those areas that it requires intentional planning, maybe even a professional development plan to put it in place, and then crafting your CV and your cover letters in a way that is a kind of shares that narrative of the skills, the experience, and how it relates to these trainings and the competencies you've developed over your career. But it takes intentional planning. That's difficult, again, if you're looking at this bucket of applicants who are looking for a safe, stable, secure job. They don't want to be worked to death in a clinic as a clinician, seeing 15 patients, 16 patients a day. The career trajectory piece factors in to those clinical decisions, or those career decisions, right? So I guess at the end of the day, like, just to wrap it up, probably the big reasons that we're seeing some decline over the PT and OT space for applicants into the program, and this is something that is being talked about at the national level, at the national organizations, at the certification bodies. I know it's being talked about at faculty meetings and program meetings across the country, because I've been hearing about it from my colleagues that are at other universities. I remember having conversations about it when we were having faculty meetings when I was a professor. Like, this is something that is a known issue, and we've been trying to figure out a way to solve it. We have kind of shot ourselves on the OT side in the foot a little bit, creating some of this uncertainty about entry level into the profession. But really, the main reasons that are driving people into other fields are, one, that uncertainty; two, the burnout of this like corporate run high volume care that ends up getting disseminated or talked about on social media and to peers and to friends, and actively drives undergrads and prospective applicants out of those programs. And then the potential for limited compensation compared to other peers in the allied health space, right? And it's not even so much limited compensation, it's just the appearance of limited compensation. There is no clear, we have not done a good job, one, as professions, PTs and OTs, for advocating for our profession into those upper management roles, which means there aren't that many of us in those kind of roles. But then also, we don't do a good job of outlining what that looks like, how you get from A to B to those new grads, to those students while they're in the programs, to early people in their career, in the first 3 to 5 years of their career. And those three reasons kind of compound to see this kind of decline in the application rates. Obviously, I do believe that PT and OT provide an invaluable service. Research keeps bearing that out, right? Decreased risk of rehospitalizations or readmittance, fall risks, long-term clinical outcomes, quality of life. There's value to be created there. We deliver something of value. It's just a matter of communicating it in a way that is attractive to prospective students, but then also doing what we can do on the professional side to advocate for those best practices, for real value-based care down the line, et cetera, and the career growth. So I do like the idea of this buy low idea that Sarah Lyons had in her post. I do think that as applications decline, it means there's less competition for spots into programs. And if you have a long-term vision or long-term view of your career, that bodes well for you. Getting in, again, where there's less competition, maybe you're able to do it without having to add an extra year of your schooling or whatever, or wait a year while you're having applications out to other places. Gets you in, gets you getting that experience early. And again, if you do your due diligence and you set up your career path appropriately, you could use that entry level to launch into real impactful, meaningful roles. So I do think that, I'm still positive on the outlook for physical and occupational therapy, though we have some things to change, right? And there's also the potential for innovation, entrepreneurship, different practice models, and how that reshapes the future of PT and OT. But those are just some quick thoughts on this idea of what happens when or what is causing some of this decline in the applications to physical and occupational therapy programs, and kind of what we can do to kind of combat that. So anyways, that's all I've got for today. If you like the show, head on over to iTunes, leave us a rating and review. If you want to stay up to date with us, go to betteroutcomes.show. There's all kinds of places there to sign up to get on the list, and we'll send you the show notes, links to everything whenever we drop an episode, which tends to be every other week. And if you want me to cover anything in particular, any other topic as it relates to healthcare innovation, humanizing healthcare, you name it, shoot me an email, info@rehabupracticesolutions.com, or or just drop us a note. There's contact forms there too. Until the next time, folks, be safe, be healthy. I will talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Better Outcome Show with Rafi Salazar. This episode was brought to you by Strata PT. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how their EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.